Greetings, my friends. Mkwann is here. Gregorian calendar date October 16th, Gregorian calendar year 2024. And, you know, things are getting weird out there, right? Um, on the surface, if you're paying attention, I'm on the East Coast of the United States. In the past 2 weeks, um, we've seen these big hurricanes, right? Whatever caused them. Most interestingly was the second one, Milton, went from a Category 1 storm and accelerated to a Category 5 storm in a handful of hours. I think that's something that's never been done before or seen before. Likewise, like less than a week later than that, where I am in Pennsylvania, the aurora borealis, the northern lights, were visible in the sky. And I don't recall that ever happening within my lifetime. And so, at the very least, there's something unusual and uncommon happening in our atmosphere, let's say. And I think of these two events. I'm assuming they have to be linked. I mean, they're both anomalies and they happened around the same period of time, and they're anomalies that are atmospheric. How it happened, I don't know. That's above my pay grade. But I'm pointing that out. And then I also want to bring into the equation of just like general weirdness, right? It's a little bit more difficult to objectively quantify. I hear this a lot when people are talking about, oh, there's just like, things are just really strange right about now. But I think people have been saying that since, at least 15 years. So, is the strangeness or the weirdness ratcheting up? I seem to think it is. I know in my personal life, things are getting really, really bizarre. And what I mean by that is the degree of integration between like seeming events in life is just becoming tighter and tighter. Like, synchronicities are becoming more and more obvious. They're becoming more frequent, more intense in all of these different things. So, what exactly is happening? I don't know. Anyone who tells you that they know, I'd be a little bit suspect. All we can say is like, is a change happening? And I think it's a fair conclusion to say there's something which is changing in our environment. And what I mean by environment, I mean where we're living life and how we're living life. So that is the kind of where this video is, or the purpose of this video, because there is something which is coming around the corner, which I think is going to be tied, which only makes sense that it's tied into everything that we're seeing. Like, what I think we're seeing is a change. We're seeing a change in terms of how life is lived. So what I'm going to point out to you is an alignment between false time and real time is coming up. And I want to walk you through that so that it makes conscious sense. Like, so you get it rationally. Like, I'm not just like some kook on the internet just saying crazy things without being able to back it up. And I want to walk you through this because if you're watching these videos, I'm assuming like, this type of analysis or storytelling resonates with you. And I think that this is this is a period, a moment which is coming up, which we should be conscious about. All right, so let me switch gears right now and begin to refresh everyone's memory as to what I mean by false time and real time. So I talk a lot about this concept of false time versus real time. And these are, I've got a couple slides from a course I made probably in 2019, I think is when this was. Uh, there's no such thing as 7:15 a.m. Tuesday or February. These are artificial concepts, though convenient, that create a foundational link between your inner world or consciousness to a false reality. Convenience and refinement are often the selling points of false reality. So, false reality is like, the paradigm which we live in. The entire false reality time management system is based upon calendars and understanding what day it is. When else would you know to pay your mortgage? Where a mortgage literally means a death grip. Baseline reality provides objective, observable, and universal time management devices, the sun, the moon, and the planets. And here I go and I kind of like compare the difference between baseline reality truth and false reality distortion, where a sunrise to sunrise event could be equal to a day. But in false reality, midnight to midnight is a day, but there's no such thing as midnight. Like midnight is a concept. If you don't have a clock, there's no such thing as midnight. New moon to new moon is a month. However, in the calendar system, there's, we have the months which are based upon the lunar cycle, but unless the new moon corresponds with the first of the month, they're not related. And that's always been the big emphasis which I use when describing this concept of false time and real time. Like a calendar month is like a real concept, and it's really based upon something which is observably true, the moon. But when you take the month and you have it not grounded in observable reality, it's floating. It's just an abstract concept. And this is the basis of worldwide indoctrination. Like, the overwhelming majority of the people on Earth are in agreement, that, as I'm recording this is, according to the timekeeping mechanism, today is Wednesday. And, everyone would agree that today is Wednesday. In fact, they wouldn't even question the fact that Wednesday doesn't exist. And all of life is then built up upon time. In fact, anthropologists, that's the foundational way of grouping people together or defining groups of people, is the agreed upon definition of the perception of time. That comes before language. And, we can look at the world now as an example. We've got all of these different cultures, or seemingly different cultures, where people speak different languages and maybe have different holidays and so forth. But everyone still agrees upon, what day it is. That's more foundational. That is the agreement, the social agreement, even before language. And so that's so significant in the fact that the foundational agreement on time has nothing to do with observable reality, which means that individual and collective consciousness for the majority of humanity is based upon something which is not grounded. And when the basis of your grounding on consciousness is not grounded, then the ability to manipulate becomes much, much easier. That's why, a small group can manage such a large group. That's where it begins, at least. So let me just continue down with this. Like the phases of the moon, those are real. You can see a new moon. You can't see the new moon, but there will be no moon. The quarter moons, where it looks like a half circle, and the full moon, these are very distinct markers which are observable in the sky, and they more or less correspond, the phases, the amount of of days between the phases is usually about 6 to 8 days. It corresponds to a week. And just remember that word week, as opposed to strong. That's built into the language, the lexicon. But seeing the difference between the two and the years and so forth. There are observable, true time periods, and then we begin to use these other false concepts. Certainly they provide a benefit, primarily the benefit that everyone's on the same page so that they can be good human resources to hold the whole paradigm in place. But it's still based upon something that doesn't exist outside of paradigm. False matrix reality distorts and disconnects the mind from the real. Here we can look at the cycle of the moon and so forth. So that's just kind of a refresher. It's much of courses I teach, when I do Starboard sessions, I'm always grounding it first and foremost that we understand real time, just for the purpose that there's a clarity in conscious thought. So that's a little bit different than our subconscious thought, that we are aware and we're clear that there's a real time and there's a false time. And just having that distinction is immensely powerful. It begins to wake one up from the dream, in the same way that once a subliminal advertisement is exposed to you, once you see subliminals placed within an advertisement, its effect diminishes. And so just like popping the balloon between the false and the true time periods, like that does something. And then what it really does is it allows someone to become more grounded in what I call baseline reality. That doesn't answer the question of the mystery of life. We still have no idea what any of this stuff is, where we are, how we got here, but at least we have as solid ground as we can have. I mean that metaphorically, solid ground. And we are, and that gives us the potential of the capability of moving in and out of paradigm without being as affected by paradigm. Those are kind of like the general concepts behind it. So that being said, let's see what I'm talking about. What's going on? So this here is the moon phases for calendar year 2024. And you can see this is all the dates of the new moon, the first quarter, the full moon, the third quarter. These are, the phases, and the week periods are what corresponds to the week. This would be the, looking at the moon from a Gregorian concept. And we'll see that the new moon, or the beginning of each, what should be the beginning of the month, doesn't correspond with calendar months. So we've got January 11th, February 9th, the 10th, the 8th, the 7th, the 6th, the 4th, the 2nd, all the way down to the 1st. So now we actually see that, coming up, we're going to have 2 calendar months which are beginning to line up with, false time and real time are beginning to overlap. So let's first look at this November. Let's look at the calendar month of November. So the calendar month of November, the new moon is on the 1st, the first quarter is on the 9th, the full moon is on the 15th, and the third quarter is on the 22nd. And so here we see a calendar, and we've got here's the new moon on Friday the 1st, and then the second phase begins on Saturday the 9th, and the full moon phase begins on the 15th, and the final last quarter phase begins on the 22nd. And yes, this is lined up. It's more lined up than some of the other months by beginning on the 1st. That's more lined up than June, that begins the month, and the new moon are off by 5 days. But now let's look at December. Now this is December 2024, and we see the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd. And these days, the 1st, the 8th, the 15th, and the 22nd line up perfectly with the calendar. So we have this time period, this one lunation, if you will. Lunation is a lunar cycle period from new moon to new moon, which lines up perfectly with the calendar time. So we will have this period of time where those two are aligned. So what does that mean? What does that mean besides that just being like novel? It's like, oh, that's one more piece of trivia I can hold in my already overburdened mental space. That's not what I'm trying to convene in this video. Time, calendars, all of this sort of stuff is ultimately ties into consciousness, and we are where we're experiencing this life, like this realm of life. I don't know if there's realms outside of this. I don't know what this realm is. I don't know if this is, a simulation or a dream, or what the Bible says or what the scientists say. But what I do know is that this is a consciousness-driven experience, and what we hold in our inner world, and how it meets the outer world, like that creates a loop that's circulating, that's always circulating between outer world and inner world, and outer world and inner world. And it's a dance. At sometimes one will push, at other times the other will push. And that's kind of where we experience our lives. And we're going to go through a period where the false reality and the baseline reality are going to be integrated. For your typical person who has no idea about time and false time, and their consciousness is completely grounded within the paradigm. Like, this is no different than any other month. But for those of you who this resonates with, you're like, okay, I get it. That makes sense, Mike. This provides an interesting window. And so what do you do with that? Well, I think that's part of the experiment of being alive. It's like, I don't know, we're figuring this out as we go. But what's being implied, certainly, is that anything that you do during that time period, and if you're constantly, like, if you're aware during that, like, December 1st to, it's actually through December 30th, to the 29th, because December 30th is the next new moon. There's going to be a strong connection. There's always a strong connection between the inner world and the outer world. But now it's going to be, at least in theory, potentially, whatever you're planning to do, whatever you do plan during that time period has that potentiality of really, really taking root within the confines of paradigm. And I would first just begin it with that. Like, this might take a little bit of time to really, like, grasp how you want to meet this window. And then particularly, this is how I began the video. I began this video talking about, like, just like it seemingly is ratcheting up. It's getting, like, more and more intense, from the time of me recording this video and that time period in December. Like, we're going to, at least in the United States, go through an election. We'll see what happens with that. There's probably going to be even more and more intensity. But beginning to plan on how you want to utilize that time period, which we're seemingly crescendoing towards, now's the time to begin that planning. But there's another element to what we're looking at in terms of time period. So let's go a little bit deeper. So we're back at the calendar, and this is a really tight alignment, right? But this could have happened in November instead of December. This could have been in October, or it could have been in any of the other calendar months in general. And keep in mind, the Gregorian calendar, which we use, is a blending between solar cycles and lunar cycles. What we think of as the month in the Gregorian calendar is based upon a lunar cycle. And then when we think of really when we mark the change of the year and how many days we say are in a year, 365, that is based upon solar cycle. We're saying each new day is defined by the, it's midnight, but it's a sunrise to sunrise event, more or less. We have a solar influence, and we also have this lunar influence. And just as we can look at the moon this way, where we have the full moon up here and we've got the new moon out here, all light, all dark, and then we have the quarters where it's half light and half dark, the same thing happens with the sun. We've got what corresponds to the top of the circle, or the full moon, would be the solstice, the summer solstice. This would be the winter solstice, most amount of light, least amount of light. And then this is where we're 50-50, like on the equinoxes. It's the same friggin' cycle. It's just kind of, it's expressed in different octaves, but they resonate. They resonate in the same way that the same musical note resonates from octave to octave. So we see right here, 20, 21, 22 of December is the winter solstice. So this alignment of lunation with calendar also corresponds with the bottom right here of the solar cycle, or the winter solstice. I mean, that's just true for all of us who live latitudes north of the equator. It would be the opposite for the south, but that makes my head spin to try to explain that. I don't know how many people watch these videos who live south of the equator, but you're probably accustomed to doing those translations. Anyway, so where am I going with this? This is where it gets really interesting, because remember, all of this is consciousness. Like, I'm talking to you about this and explaining it to your rational mind. Like, your rational mind wants to think linearly. It wants to understand data points. It wants to understand how things are related. But we've got another part of our mind, which, one, we could define as the subconscious, which we're not even aware of. Or we also have the part of mind where we're able to see not necessarily linear connections, but holistic connections, where we see how everything connects even across non-linear places. And we're dealing with consciousness. So the bottom of this chart, if you will, for the sun is the winter solstice, which is what we define as having the least amount of sunlight. So let's first begin with this so you can see this for yourself. This here is it shows you sunrise to sunset times, and then the length of daylight. And this is December 2024. And we'll see right here on the 20th, 21st, and 22nd that the length of time, this is the shortest. This is what we call the solstice. The beginning of December, there was 9 hours and 28 minutes of daylight. And then when we get to the bottom, it's 9 hours and 15. And this is based upon the latitude which I'm at. So those numbers might vary a little bit different, may vary depending upon where you are, but conceptually it'll be the same in the fact that the calendar date of the 20th, 21st, and 22nd, we see very little change. In fact, we could see that on the 20th, at the 20th, we've got 9 hours, 15 minutes, and 49 seconds. And then the 21st, 9 hours, 15 minutes, 48 seconds. And then we begin to gain time again on the 22nd. So we hit the bottom right here, and then we gain 3 more seconds of daylight. Now this concept of has been described like in a lot of like astrotheological literature, and it is one of the quote unquote true explanations of the story of Jesus, and be going into the cave for 3 days and dying and then coming back to life. And so it's told that that's what this represents, these 3 days where it appears that the sun does not move. And what it means by the sun does not move, or probably a better way of thinking about it, is the amount of growth in terms of how much sunlight you get during a sunrise to sunrise time period or day. I'm trying to be really precise with my language, but the amount of sunlight does not change from day to day. It basically stays the same. We see that there's just like 2 or 3 seconds between the two. And we could go up to, like, here's December 1st. We see that from November 30th to December 1st, there was a minute difference, 1 minute and 16 seconds difference between the amount of daylight. And then the next day, it's getting shorter. The amount of change is getting shorter and shorter. The speed of how quickly it's becoming darker, it's beginning to slow down. 1 minute and 16 seconds, 58 seconds, 44 seconds, 24 seconds, until we get to these 3 days. And there's only 1 second. There's only 1 second of difference between how much light there is in a given day. The exact same thing happens in the summer solstice. So this is June 2024, and here we could see this is when the summer solstice is, and this is the longest day of the year. 15 hours, 5 minutes, and 2 seconds. 15 hours, 5 minutes, and 4 seconds. 15 hours, 5 minutes, and 3 seconds. So for these 3 days, the amount of daylight does not change. Versus, like in the beginning of June, you could see there was a minute. There was, like, each day we would see a change in the amount of daylight would increase by 1 minute. And the fastest it gets is really at the equinoxes. Look right here. So this is where the equinox is. This is basically 12 hours of daylight, 12 hours of night, and you could see it's around 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Same thing. This is the spring. No, this is the autumnal equinox. This right here is the spring equinox, and this is 2 minutes and 42 seconds. This is 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And you can see there's an acceleration. There's an acceleration of the amount of light which is either increasing or decreasing in a given day. And so I'm gonna tie this all together, but I want you to understand this rationally so that you can delve into its implications on a deeper level, but you are grounded in understanding what is happening. So, all right, so let's go back to this. So this period right here, this 20, 21, 22, is the period where the sunlight is the least amount, and it is the change in sunlight from day to day is moving most slowly. And so in our modern world, you can be like, well, who cares? Who's ever going to notice that? I'm never going to notice that. Like, we're talking about seconds. Like, I'm used to, like, in a second receiving 1,000 pieces of data, right? If if you got a smartphone, you're getting so much information that this type of information, receiving this level of information of the speed, the velocity, and the acceleration or deceleration and the amount of daylight, like, how am I ever going to notice that? Like, how much subtlety, this is too subtle to pick up. And that's just simply not true. It's just simply not true. We're going to begin with this. So light is one of the most defining environmental factors that determines an animal's activity pattern. Now, this statement is grounded in talking about animals, but the same is true for you and me because our nervous systems work in a similar sort of manner. And so there is one of the most defining factors that determines our activity pattern. So we're going to go deeper and deeper with this. So there is this, like, very, very, and this happens every solstice. This happens every equinox. This is always happening. We're always in this dance. We just don't even recognize it. I'm just bringing clarity as to what's happening. So light is immensely significant. And then we see this. So exposure to sunlight is thought to increase the brain's release of the hormone serotonin. Serotonin is associated with boosting mood, helping a person feel calm and focused. It's probably very limiting in terms of, describing. It's immensely limiting of describing, like, the human experience. But because we understand how paradigm works, we're able to expand the little nuggets that we're given of insight into how we work. But this is what we're really interested in, because we're interested in the winter solstice. At night, darker lighting triggers the brain to make another hormone, melatonin. So the winter solstice is the melatonin, is melatonin producing. And so we typically think about melatonin just like, when you go to sleep. Like, I'm just thinking about it like when I go to sleep and then when I wake up, as opposed to looking at it on a much larger scale of the physiological part of my body is constantly, like, taking in these changes of light, how much the velocity of light and how much light I receive from a sunrise to sunrise event. And it's not just nighttime and more night that I'm interested with melatonin release, but we see that, like, there is a cascading, as I said, to release more and more melatonin. Melatonin is produced in darkness, usually at night, by the pineal gland. So melatonin is a pineal gland occurrence. The winter solstice is a pineal gland relationship. What does this say? Known as the hormone of darkness, the onset of melatonin at dusk promotes activity. So it's framing up melatonin as just like dusk is the trigger. But I just showed you, like, no, it's always changing. Like, yes, dusk is an obvious impact onto your how the sun setting will impact the release of melatonin, but there are other cycles in play, very, very observable cycles and predictable cycles, which are also influencing melatonin release, which is pineal gland activity. Biologists say that melatonin is produced by the pineal gland. Now, melatonin is found to be a key player in controlling circadian rhythms. It's a master regulator of time. So now we go and see, like, this is a time thing. This is our perception of time, and it's our perception of time with real time because it is triggered by light, particularly sunlight. It affects our stress levels, regulates a number of biological functions, which subsequently control the biorhythms of the body. Metaphysicists consider it to be the doorway to lucid dreaming, telepathy, clairvoyance, and cosmic visions. In a nutshell, they claim it to be a tool that makes one surpass the limitations of his physical, mental, and intellectual realms. So now let's go back to this. The winter solstice can always be seen as an opportunity to delve deep into whatever you think pineal gland is, whatever you think melatonin is. Like, we just have hints of it based upon what we've been exposed to. You probably have greater hints of it based upon your own experiences. But still, we probably only know the tip of the iceberg, but we know that something happens every winter solstice, just like the inversion happens on the summer solstices and so forth. On the summer solstice, there's only one summer solstice. So first off, like, bringing this awareness into our like most, front and centered consciousness, our rational mind, like, we become more ingrained with it. But now we're going to put that knowledge into harmony with, we know that this is a very, very special time or unique time in which false time and real time are connected. So again, I'm not suggesting like a course of action. I am encouraging a period of time for you to begin to ask, like, well, what do I want to do with this? Everything I just showed you is functionally and factually accurate. The one thing we don't know is, like, well, how deep does it go? What can we do with it? So I'm going to wrap this up by giving an example of what I plan on doing with this. I've taught 2 iterations of an online class last year, which I called Natural Astrology, where I basically explain all of this sort of stuff and more stuff along these lines of how to have and develop an objective relationship with the mystery of life, utilizing the heavens without necessarily getting lost in the contradictions and confusions and just like nonsense of most astrology which is out there. There's a truth beneath it. And I taught that class before. And I only did it twice because I knew it wasn't really right. I was like, the information was right, but the positioning of it or the purpose of it, I don't think I necessarily, like, on an individual level, wasn't really, I wasn't settled with it. And I've spent most of this year with this idea in the back of my mind, like, what does it look like? How do I go and I reintroduce this class? So that being said, I'm reintroducing this class on December 1st. And whereas before I called it Natural Astrology, and one of the problems that I felt with that is, like, that's too limiting of a title. And so I'm renaming it Grounding Consciousness, because that's what it is. And that's what we just went through. And what I just kind of described is we are grounding consciousness in something that's real. And I knew that I'm getting to the point where I'm going to reintroduce this class. And I wasn't really certain when I was going to go and do it. And the only reason I know about this is this event of how the alignment between the lunar cycle and the calendar cycle are going to be so lined up in December is because Christy brought that to my attention. And I was like, Well, that is absolutely the perfect timing for me to reintroduce this information into a wider audience. And so that's one of the ways, which maybe for inspiration, which you can look and say, like, what is something which I want to do, and then reintroduce introduce into the world, the paradigm world, assuming you still have some sort of interaction with paradigm. I certainly do. But a way to really become more ingrained with it. And on top of all that, it's more or less lining up with my birthday, which happens on the 2nd of December. And so that's what I'm doing. So I'm sharing that with you for two reasons. Reason number one is inspiration. Like, this is an idea of how you can use this information to apply it within your own life. And then two, I haven't opened up this course yet, but if you're interested in it, send me an email, reach out. I haven't even put up like sign up stuff yet on like Linktree. That's basically the only thing I use. I'm limiting it to 20 people, and if you're interested, reach out now with an email, and you can get a space if you want it. So that being said, this is mkwann, and I'm signing out. Take good care.